Cárdenas, who is a Cuban professor and blogger and political analyst who I met all the way back in 2000. Let's see, I wrote it down here. Summer of 2011 in Matanzas, Cuba. And back at that time, I was interested in interviewing Cuban bloggers, especially from all different from the whole political spectrum. And so I went around the country and I spoke with some of the most prominent bloggers. And at that time, Harold was certainly one of the most prominent. And his blog, which he was at that time operating with two other young men, is called La Joven Cuba. ¿Cómo es, Harold? The La Joven Cuba, ¿verdad?
Exactly. Joven Cuba, I say it in English. Yeah.
Joven Cuba. Okay. So I was so amazed by this blog because he would get sometimes hundreds and hundreds, and I think sometimes even a single post would go into more than 1,000 comments. And it was just a very well-read blog that generated all kinds of buzz, and there are tons of people who tuned into it. So we met back then in Matanzas in 2011, and we've been in touch on and off since then. And I go to Cuba occasionally. I used to be based in Havana, and I brought a photograph. So I used to live, just so you'll be jealous, I used to live on the beach right about there in a little community called Tarara, about 12 miles east of Havana, Cuba. And I was bureau chief for the Dallas Morning News in Cuba for 4 years. But enough about me. I'd love to hear from Harold, and I guess to start off, I wonder if you could tell us your impression of how Cuba is dealing with the coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. First, I would like to say that you were the first American journalist that I met in Cuba. So this has been a long time friendship now, 9 years till now. And yeah, things are very different now from when we met, but we are still working and we are still involved in what's going on in Cuba. So the events related to Cuba and COVID-19, I think that we can separate pretty much the government handling of the crisis in two different policies. There is a science-based policy, and there is a policy pursuing short-term interests that other countries have done. In the case of Cuba, I think that rightly so, the Cuban government has deposited all the handling of the crisis into the hands of the scientists. In Cuba, there is Dr. Duran. Is like the Dr. Fauci that Cubans have. He has a lot of prestige. People follow him all the time, and he's the one that has been leading the public, the government handling of the crisis.
Now, I looked up some numbers right before we came on here, and just want to run them by you. The total cases in the U.S. approximately 6.4 million right now, number one in the world. Total cases in Cuba, 4,266, number 119 in the world. Then if you look at the number of cases per million, the US is number 10. US is also number 10 in deaths per million with 582 deaths per million. Cuba, on the other hand, is number 163 in cases per million at 377. And just 9 deaths per million, 143rd in the world. So the US death rate is 65 times greater than that of Cuba. I'm wondering how, now that you are living in the United States and you've lived in Cuba, how is it that Cuba is able to obtain those kinds of results?
Yeah, first, I think that when we do this comparison, this country comparison, we have to highlight that we are talking about the superpower of the world, that is the United States. And
Did our
on the other hand, we're
drop off
talking
there?
about. No, it's okay here.
Harold,
So
did the audio
one is
drop
a,
off? I was wondering how
no,
Cuba
it's okay.
was.
Yeah. So Cuba
Okay.
managed to do this. Cuba managed to do this because Cuba has a lot of experience managing crisis. This is a country that is sanctioned by the United States government, so it's not in the best position in Latin America to have another crisis. The Cuban government was under a lot of pressure from the Trump administration economically. So the fact that they have achieved these results is a good testimony to the experience that the Cuban institutions have managing crisis. And when I say crisis, it can be a pandemic or it can be a hurricane. It can be whichever example you want. They are very good managing crisis. And that's something that we have to recognize. Very often in the US, when the media approach the Cuba handling of the crisis, they try to they they have trouble trying to separate the criticism that they might have of the Cuban government from the managing of the crisis. We might have a lot of complaints, a lot of things to criticize about the political structure of the country, but that doesn't discredit how well they have done to manage the crisis. Tracy? Tracy, do you hear me?
Okay. The audio drops off a little, but yes, I can. The audio drops off sometimes, but I'd like to try and answer this question from Lucia, who said, "And what measures have they taken?"
Yeah. Okay, measures. First, they had a very Cuban the system of public health in Cuba is all about preventive, about being preventive. Like they put all the money and they put most of the effort on prevention. So what they have done is that they have organized groups of students that go medicine students, people that help them. They go door to door in Cuba, checking the health of everybody. They have done a lot of testing, and they are pretty much trying to knock on every door at least once a week to see how people are. When they discover cases in some place, in a specific place, then they isolate that place. So they have a structure of how to handle a specific case depending on the state that the case is. If you are suspicious of having the virus, you are isolated. If you have the virus, then you are moved to a place that they're going to handle that there. Like they have different scales of where you are and how to treat you. But I think it's been working very well. Tracy? So Lucia is also asking if the testing is available. The testing is available. I think I was very concerned about this in the beginning because Cuba is not a developed country, cannot compete with other countries in the international market to get all the testing that maybe a country like the US can get. But they
Okay.
have managed,
I'm
they
having a
have
little
received
trouble
testing.
hearing you, so I'm going to try to switch my uh, internet connection
Okay,
and connect it. I will
sure.
let me just try this.
Hi, Lucia. I see that Lucia is still asking. I live in Washington right now. I was a blogger in Cuba. I came to the US to study, to do a master's degree in international relations at Columbia University. I graduated. I'm in OPT right now. That is, I have some time here. So I'm glad to be here and join Tracy. Hi, Tracy.
Okay, I'm reconnecting here because I haven't been able to hear you.
Do you hear me well now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. This is
Okay.
a bad connection, but let me try. Let me see if this is better. Okay, I'm reconnecting because we have had some uh, trouble with our signal. So I'm going to go down in the messages we hear. I see a message from Lucia asking about measures, and Lucia is also asking about the availability of testing. And do you know how that works in Cuba?
Yeah, I was just telling Lucia while you were out that Cuba is not in the best position to get a lot of tests, but Cuba has received a lot of test kits from international organizations. I even remember that there was a donation from Alibaba from China trying to be sent to Cuba. The embargo, I think, prevented that donation to arrive to the country, sadly. But I think that many people are trying also to help Cuba.
Okay. Now, I understand that there's Cuba is now under a 15-day lockdown. Have you are you in touch with people who are telling you how that is working out? I guess it's a lockdown in Havana.
Yes. Okay. The lockdown is not national. It's focused on areas that are having new cases. This happened after Cuba had a long streak of having zero cases every day. And then all of a sudden, the resurgence of new COVID cases in Havana and other provinces and other cities forced the government to implement new measures and to be more, to make a bigger effort to control the virus. So at this point, some cities and most people concentrate on Havana. I think is the worst case at this point. They're trying to isolate those cases and to isolate the communities that the cases are happening. So they're trying to do that. It's not easy, Tracy. If it's hard in the United States when people can when people can communicate via Zoom, via Skype, and you can work from home and you can study from home, you cannot do that. You cannot buy Amazon to buy your food in Cuba. You don't have Seamless or Grubhub to order online your food. What you need to do is to go
Yeah,
out
that's got to
with a
be
mask and buy it outside. And there are long lines right now in Cuba, which is very risky, but it's also a result of the economic situation in Cuba. Tracy? Okay, I think Tracy still has the line. I can receive any questions that you might have and I can answer.
And there's a
Tracy?
this is probably a difficult question, but um, is the impact of the pandemic worse or economic sanctions worse?
Well, at this point, first we have to mention that
Yes,
the handling of the
I was
pandemic is
I was
influenced.
wondering,
Yeah,
has the economic impact of the pandemic been worse than the economic impact of U.S. sanctions?
yeah. I think that the embargo influences how you manage the pandemic. Like you don't have the access to kits. You have trouble receiving donations that for other countries are normal to receive. You don't have your institutions are weaker than other countries. The contrast, and I think Lucia was telling this in the comments, how they have managed the virus in such a
I'm
condition,
having
like
a
being
lot
a
of trouble
sanctioned
hearing.
country,
Can you hear me,
is a
Harold?
thing. Yeah, I hear you perfectly.
Okay. Uh,
Tracy, you look like you are talking from Cuba.
I know. I'm having a lot of trouble with my connection. I just going to. Well, I guess we can just keep plowing through. It's just a bad connection. It's difficult. I can't always hear when you're talking, and then your screen looks frozen, and so I can't tell if you're talking or whether you've finished or not. I'd like to move on and ask uh, a little bit about the impact of U.S. policy toward Cuba and how you think things would change if Biden is elected.
Yeah. Well, the current state of relations between the both countries is actually that there is little relation between the two countries. The current policy of the United States towards Cuba is not a real policy. There is no national policy towards Cuba. There is an electoral strategy to gain votes from Florida. That is what's being applied to Cuba. Like the national interests of the United States, in my opinion, are not being taken into consideration. And what is being taken into consideration is the pursuit of American votes in Florida for the administration. So I think that's what's going on. They're pursuing votes in Florida, and that's why they are applying a policy of maximum pressure towards the country that weakens the country during the pandemic. I think that there is a humanitarian point to be made about the fact that they have increased the sanctions on Cuba during the pandemic instead of alleviating a little bit those policies. So, in the worst time for any country in the world to be managing a crisis, an economic crisis, and a humanitarian crisis, the U.S. is doubling down the sanctions on Cuba. I think that there is no policy rationale that can sustain that morally of this. Tracy? Yeah, I'm gonna keep talking while you catch up. Okay. So the other thing is the impact of the U.S. policy on Cuba. How have affected the Cuban economy, for example. And I think it's easy to underestimate the effects on Cuba. It's very easy to underestimate that, but the influence is overwhelming. The use and the use of economic sanctions to pursue goals in a country is
Harold,
not a
I'm going
modus
to try
operandi.
changing locations to see if the signal
Sure,
improves because I can't hear you. So
sure.
please stay
Okay,
on the line there, and I'm going to just try to change locations and see if it improves.
I will. I will. I was trying to make a point that the use of sanctions to pursue political goals in a different country is not a practice that is recognized by the international community. And that's why overwhelmingly all the nations in the world against the embargo, because it's pretty much morally it's hard to uh, like how are you going to apply sanctions on a small country that are targeting the population and not the government, like, so that's crazy. So from here, as I see Lucia is commenting, from
Okay,
here
let's see
it
here.
can only get better. Hi Tracy, you're back.
Yeah, I'm going to go outside and see if the signal improves.
Yeah, I see you much better now.
Oh, good. I can see, yeah, I have a better signal here. I
Mhm.
was having trouble. let's see. Okay. Okay.
Okay,
Is this a little bit better?
it is better.
Okay. Um, okay, good deal. So, I'd like to, I saw that you, and you might have mentioned this when I was moving to change positions, but um, I read that an interview that Biden gave to NBC, he said that he was going to reverse Obama's policies. Um,
Yeah.
how do you think that? Do you think that will happen?
Um, who do you mean? You mean
Um,
Biden?
what? Yeah, what I read was that Joe Biden gave an interview to NBC News in which he said that he was going to back reversing Trump's policies toward Cuba.
Oh, okay. Yes. First, Biden was the VP of an administration that started normalization with Cuba, so it makes sense that he goes back to the previous policy. Jill Biden was in Cuba actually during the normalization, so maybe there is some family connection there, and with Cuba, and the other thing is that I think that both countries at this point could have learned from the mistakes and the achievements of the previous attempt of normalization. Like there are things to be learned for both sides on how to do a normalization even quicker, better, to engage normally. I think that both sides have to learn from the previous attempt during Obama. And I think there's a lot, they started a lot that can be retaken very quickly. And actually, for example, I'm going to give you an example. One of the requisites of the American government during the normalization and of the Obama policy towards Cuba during that time is we're going to normalize, but there are things that you must do in Cuba for us to do this. And one of those things was to improve the access to information in Cuba, to improve access to internet. And the Cuban government has been improving this even during Trump. So I think the Cuban government is still on the rails of normalization, waiting for the United States to get back in and start moving together. Tracy? Do you hear me, Tracy? Okay. While Tracy joins back, I'm going to keep going on this. Another thing that people usually don't speak about is um, the correlation of power in Cuba, because very often we talk about if the Republicans or the Democrats in the US are willing to normalize with Cuba, but very few people look at Cuba and try to understand the correlation of force in Cuba. And the thing is that in Cuba, you will have people that want to engage and you will have hardliners. So during the Trump administration, many of those hardliners in the Communist Party, for example, they have gained a lot of strength during Trump, and they have make a rationale about being careful with the United States in a normalization. So we have to break that barrier too. Uh, Stop the process of polarization, and we have to stop the process of radicalization in both sides. Tracy? Yes, I see Lucia is asking if Trump made it easy for them to prove their point. Definitely. Trump put on a plate of gold to the Cuban hardliners. Like it's very easy to say that you don't need to engage America and that America is the worst when you have Trump as a president.
I see
Like
here.
Tracy?
Um, hang on one second. I'm going to try one more thing to try to fix our signal. Just one sec.
Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna finish where I was. And the thing is that you will have hardliners in both sides. You have hardliners in Florida that have this extreme far right narrative, and you will have hardliners in the Communist Party in Cuba, and they both don't want any normalization. So, and you have the common people in Cuba wanting to have a normal country with normal relations with the U.S. and have normal lives and overcome the crisis. I think those are the people we have to think
Okay.
about. Tracy?
Harold, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I can hear you well.
Okay. I'm still trying to hear Harold. Harold, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's as if I'm still in Cuba.
Yes. I. This is what
Okay.
happens,
So
Tracy, when you speak.
can you hear me now?
Okay. So I can keep going, or Tracy.
So Harold, I saw a question. Your image is frozen, but I saw a question that came in asking when you left Cuba.
Yes, I left Cuba in 20. Well, actually, it's a funny story. Um, I wasn't thinking about leaving Cuba. I gave a series of conferences in several universities in the U.S. NYU, Georgetown University, Columbia University,
I'm going to move
FI.
locations again and see if
Okay,
this
okay. I was giving some
improves.
lectures in the U.S. and then I went back to Cuba. And
Okay. Hello again, Harold. Okay. Yes. Can you hear me now? Oh,
okay, I'm back. Got it, Tracy? Okay. Can anybody see
okay.
us? Okay. Let me.
I'm still here. I'm just sorry that the connection is so bad on my end. So, uh, yes, yes, I can hear you. So, I wanted to ask if you could tell me a little bit about what it was like to operate a blog in Cuba and what kind of resistance, if any, you faced from the government.
Yeah.
I can
First, I'm
see
gonna
you.
finish the previous. Okay. First, I'm gonna finish the previous question, and then I'm gonna jump to this one. Um, so Trump won
Should
the
I repeat the
election in
question? Did you hear
2016.
me?
Yeah, I heard it well. I heard it well. I'm gonna combine both questions. So Trump won the election in 2016, and the following day, I applied to Columbia University to come to the United States. So I knew that during a Trump administration, it would be harder to operate in civil society in Cuba. So I used the time to study and to cultivate myself a little bit more, and and that's why I came to the U.S. I did 2 years of a master's degree, and now I finished, and I'm open for something new. And that's how I came to the United States. Regarding the blogging in Cuba is not easy at all. In 2010, that we started blogging, it was a bit easier because Raul Castro was speaking about being more critical, being open to new ideas, which makes it easier for us to start a blog and do the things that we were doing. But after that, it got a lot worse. It got the Cuban government stopped embracing criticism and didn't like it. During the normalization, they like it even less. And now it's very hard to do it. Like, the more the United States makes pressure on the Cuban government, the less space you have for civil society in Cuba. There is a correlation there. The more pressure from the U.S., the more the Cuban government shuts down civil society. So I knew that during Trump it would be very, very hard to keep it going. But we still publish in my blog every day. It's called Joven Cuba, John Cuba. You can Google it online. Tracy? Tracy, do you hear me? Yes, jovencuba.com. Exactly. Okay. So any questions I can answer from now here. If while we wait for Tracy, we've been blogging since 2010, so it's 10 years now. Tracy?
Okay, I'm just trying to get connected here, and I've had a few problems, but um, so one,
Yes.
yes, I'm here. There's a long
So
delay between my audio and when it actually gets to you.
yes, a lot.
And
So the
so
people's
one question I wonder is, why do you think there was never a so-called Cuban Spring in Cuba? Um, why haven't efforts to bring about uh,
so sorry, Tracy. Yeah, we have some questions. The people's reaction to the blog. I think that the people's reaction was very positive. Tracy?
yes.
Yes, I'm telling Lucia about the people's reaction to the blog. I think it has been very positive. We have almost 6 million views so far since we started, which is a lot in Cuba, a country that is a very disconnected from the internet. So I will say, being cautiously, I will say that we are one of the independent media in the country that is better known. Tracy? So we have new people watching.
Yes.
I'm a
Here's
Cuban
another
blogger.
question. Can you give me a very brief overview of the topic and who you guys are?
Yes, I will say I'm a Cuban blogger, or I was a Cuban blogger. I was a professor of philosophy in Cuba for years. I became a political analyst in the US. What I work right now is I'm a political risk analyst. And we are talking about Cuba, of how Cuba handled the COVID-19 crisis, and everything else that is going on with Cuba, civil society, internet politics, and relations with the U.S. Trace?
And I'm a journalist.
Yeah, I think we lost Tracy again. One of the interesting things in Cuba is that you have very slow internet with a lot of ups and downs. So I think for being a Cuban topic, is the connection is like Cuba. Tracy?
Yes.
Yeah, we're ready for questions.
Okay. Okay. I was wondering, do you miss Cuba, and how is it living here? And you probably haven't been back for some time. How do you feel about your homeland?
I feel a lot of nostalgia actually. I used to, when I came to study to the US, I used to go to Cuba every 2 months. So I didn't have the time to miss it. I used to go to Cuba very, very often. Since the pandemic, I cannot go, of course. I probably have to wait till next year to go there again. I think that the situation there is very hard. My family, my friends, everything that if, the information that you know is accurate online. You see that there are long lines of people to buy food. There is a lot of scarcity. The supply of products is very low. The Cuban government has been very effective handling the pandemic, but it doesn't have the same effectivity handling the economy. Of course, it's a sanctioned country, but the economy is a combination of the U.S. embargo, our own economic issues. Like we have a tradition of having management issues in Cuba. So when you combine those two, I think it becomes very hard. And during the pandemic, it's even harder. So I only wish that Cuba was as effective with the economy as it is with the pandemic. Tracy?
And what are your yes, what are your aspirations? What would you like to do with your life? And, where do you see yourself in 5 and 10 years?
I, I, I know where my family wants to see me. My family wants to see me having a quiet life and being out of all the craziness that is Cuban politics and civil society. I do feel a responsibility to participate in the public debate on Cuba. I think that a lot of people are bringing very interesting ideas to the table, and I think that we have an opportunity to do something better. If we have if we have a Democrat in the White House and the normalization begins again, there is an opportunity to bring changes to Cuba that the country needs. And I'm not speaking necessarily of regime change or things like that. I'm speaking about Cuba has a long uh, depth with democratic changes that don't come only from the revolution from Fidel Castro's government. Since before that, we had issues with that. So we have to overcome our tradition of authoritarianism in Cuba that has been going on as for a very long time before the revolution. We've had many dictators in Cuba, and we have many presidents that were corrupt. And so we need to overcome all that. We need to explain we need to bring democratic values to the people so that people start listening to other people that don't think like them. Because you can take an anti-communist activist in Florida, a Cuban American in Florida, and you can take a hardliner from the Communist Party, and they both think very similarly, and they both behave very similarly. There is a lot of sectarianism there. There is a lot of not listening to the other side and not wanting to give them political rights to the other side. And what we need to do is to sit everybody on the same table and give representation to the whole spectrum of ideas that we have in Cuba. That's what we are missing. We're missing the representation of the whole spectrum of ideas. That I think is what it is a democracy. Tracy?
Do you see the message there as a political analyst? Is there a specific subject or field you work in? And what are some of the major issues you're concerned with and or working with?
Yes, I studied in Colombia. I specialize in two things: technology, media, and communications, and Latin America, trying to learn from other experiences in the region. So I think there is an opportunity there. I think that the Cuban government, if the Cuban government were smart, they will try to work with us, with people that are not in the country, and they will recognize that we have something to bring to the table and that we can help in this process. I think that we have to. I would love to join this process of normalization. This process, we need to build and strengthen better our institutions in Cuba. We need to do a lot of work in order to have a better country. But the Cuban government is very close for now to have no participation at all from people that are not from within the ranks of the government. So at this point, I see myself working from civil society. I would love to join. I don't have the opportunity that my classmates have in Columbia University of finishing to study and then join the public service in their country. I cannot join the public service in Cuba, sadly, because the Cuban government doesn't want to. So I think I will join the conversation from civil society. Home in Cuba is the organization that I'm part of, and we try to bring nuances to the table on what is going on in Cuba.
And when you see or when you hear people in the United States saying, calling each other communists or saying, that some aspects of the United States are just like Cuba or just like a communist country, what goes through your head? How do you see that type of rhetoric?
Well, it's like people are stuck in the Cold War. The things that are being addressed are not even rational. There is a button that you push with Cuba that if you're going to speak about Cuba, you have to become a hardline anti-communist, like you were in the middle of the Cold War, if you want to speak about Cuba. And I think that is a trope. There is a trope in American politics. It becomes the easy way. The easy narrative is to embrace an anti-communist narrative and say, for example, I support the Biden campaign. I cannot donate because I'm not a resident or a citizen, but I totally support the Biden campaign. I think it's going to be a great administration if they win. But Biden did a mistake during the debates, because when Bernie Sanders said that Cuba was an authoritarian government with also good stuff in the social side, Biden said that he wasn't. So, and it is true. Cuba has an authoritarian government with a lot of good stuff in the social side, like public health, good education, things like that might even be better, but are very good compared to other countries. If you don't recognize that, if you don't have the ability to be to recognize the good stuff and the bad stuff, and you only want to play the bad key points on Cuba because you are afraid to lose votes in Florida, that is an issue. I think that the discourse about Cuba and the conversation about Cuba, it has been hijacked by Cuban American votes in Florida for a long time. So politicians are afraid to speak openly and honestly about Cuba because they don't want to lose those votes. And I think that is a problem for American democracy and for the American interest, because you have a section of the country hijacking the national policy towards a country. Tracy?
Yes. And are there any big misconceptions that you think people in the United States have about Cuba? Have you heard ideas that people express here about Cuba without ever having been there, but they might express an idea that you know for a fact is outlandish?
I think that the whole tropical gulag perception on Cuba is wrong. Like, yes, Cuba has a government with authoritarian trends. The U.S. is friends of a lot of countries in the world with also with authoritarian trends, so it's not that special Cuba in that way. Um, there's a misconception about how life in Cuba can be hard or not, or even the political rise in Cuba. Cuba is not a liberal democracy, but it's much more freer than what people think. I'm speaking about Cubans. So what helps Cubans is to have the Americans working with the civil society in Cuba to advance new freedoms, to advance a progressive policy that helps us to build a better country. But when you try hostility and when you try Cold War politics, that doesn't work. That it doesn't work with Cuba. We've been looking at this for 60 years. It hasn't worked with Cuba, and the Cuban people are the ones that suffer.
Can can you say something about race relations in Cuba? It's of course one of the most important topics in the United States right now. This reckoning that the U.S. has been having over its treatment of blacks, the national conversation that's going on over police shootings. Keeping that in mind and the idea that it's such a big issue here, what's it like? What are these things like in Cuba? What kind of comparison could you make?
Yes. First, I think that the Cuban Revolution, in the beginning of the 60s, they did something well. That was that they tried to advance a progressive policy, socially speaking, in Cuba. Like abortion was done. The I think that they spoke a lot about fighting racism, and institutionally they tried to make changes to fight racism. They built institutions to protect the rights of women, like that was addressed in the beginning of the revolution. But they thought that they'd done it. They thought that you could click a button and people could stop being racist and people could stop being misogynistic and everything, and that doesn't work that way. And for a long time, we've had inherited racist issues. We've had inherited things like that, social issues that you have to overcome in the country. And the Cuban government doesn't want to recognize some of those because then it will have to admit that they didn't solve the thing in the 60s. So I think that is a problem. Cuba is for being a government that sees itself and presents itself as a progressive government. Very often they miss progressive goals. And I'm speaking, for example, about equal marriage. Even the Cuban president supported publicly in Cuba equal marriage. And during last year, they had a whole debate about it, and they couldn't implement equal marriage. They couldn't put it on the constitution because you had a section from the population that said no. And the government is afraid of breaking the consensus in the country. So they didn't put it there. And I think that there are many things like that, like the rights of the rights of the animals, the gender issues that we have in Cuba, racial issues that we have in Cuba, how racism sometimes, it doesn't matter if you condemn racism in public, it doesn't matter if you don't make a real change in the families, in the homes and in the mindset of the people, that doesn't change. I think that is the racism that we still have in Cuba. It's not enough. It's not enough to have institutions that fight racism, and to have in the TV having spots, having videos playing against racism. If you don't change that in the core of your family, in the core of all the families in Cuba, that doesn't stop. And I think that is the next goal that they have.
I see here a comment from Daisy Moreno who says, I love Cuba. Cuban people are the most resilient people I have known. I hope the next U.S. administration under Biden can make it better for Cubans. Do you hear that a lot?
Well, it's very hard to find one Cuban in the island that supports Trump. Like, there is no debate in Cuba about that. It goes beyond politics. The Trump administration has affected effectively the lives of almost every Cuban. Maybe the ones that haven't been affected are the ones that receive money from the Trump administration to operate regime change in the country. But those are the only ones that are benefiting from that. Most of the Cubans are being affected by not having food on their table every day. So Trump is not popular. When Obama went to Cuba, the streets were filled with people while his car was going on the street. And this is a communist government on the island. This is Cuba. And you will have the Cubans on the street clapping at the US President Barack Obama. That will never happen with somebody like Trump, that of course is never going to go. But I don't know. And we shouldn't discard that. If Trump sees a benefit in normalizing relations with Cuba, he will definitely do it. He doesn't see the benefit. He sees the benefit on all the rhetoric of hate to apply to the negative emotions of Cuban Americans in Florida and gain their votes. What he sees is an opportunity to gain votes in Florida. Tracy?
Yes, I did see, in one of my recent trips to Cuba, I interviewed Berta Soler, leader of the Ladies in White dissident group, which was founded to support journalists, human rights activists, and others who were thrown into jail. And she is a strong supporter of Trump. So I did see that, but you're right. I didn't find too many other people outside of the kind of dissident community that supported Trump.
Tracy, but not even the whole dissident community supports Trump. I think that the smarter people in the opposition in Cuba haven't joined the Trump administration. Like, they have been very cautious about that because they know the authoritarian characteristics of Trump. And it's very hypocritical to criticize the authoritarianism of the Cuban government when you are on the boat with Donald Trump. So of course, that is an issue, and it's also hypocritical to support a regime change policy, receiving funds in Cuba to overthrow a government, from a government that is saying that the Russians are influencing and doing the same thing to them. So why is bad when the Russians do it to you, and it's good when you do it to the Cubans? That is a very hypocritical policy, but it is what it is, like Michelle Obama said.
It's interesting that it seems U.S. policy toward Cuba seems to push Cuba closer to Russia, closer to Venezuela,
and China. Yeah,
kind of in China. Exactly the opposite of what the United States would hope, I suppose.
Yeah, well, Trump is doing things great again for Russia, for China in Cuba, like all the good things, the connections that we have with the United States, and like, there are things that we can work together and that Cuba really needs. Like, the entrepreneurs were learning a lot from the United States. They were coming here often. They were learning how to make a business in Cuba. You have a very small private sector there that needs to grow, and the Cuban government is agreeing that the private sector needs to grow. So instead of taking advantage of that, what they are doing is pretty much diminish the private sector. Since Trump, the private sector in Cuba has been disappearing.
I wonder, we're coming up on 1 hour, and I wanted to see if, before we sign off, if you could talk a little bit about your program, Nuestra America, and tell our viewers what it is, how they can tune in, and what you hope to accomplish with your program.
Yes, I have a program that is called Astro America. It's a live program that we do every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern time. I do it with two colleagues. Luis Carlos Batista has a master's degree from Georgetown University. He's a jurist. And I also have with me Arturo Lopez Levy, that is a very well-known political analyst and professor here in the U.S., Cuban American that lives here in the U.S. So I think that the three of us are trying to do a program that is different from what is going on right now. What is going on right now on social media related to Cuba is that you will have hardliners from both sides trying to influence the public narrative on Cuba. You will have hardliners that are supported by the Cuban Americans in Florida that support Trump, and that are this kind of social media vedettes, and you will have people that are supported by the Cuban government, obviously trying to fight them back, and you have this confrontation of radicals online that don't bring anything helpful to the conversation. These people don't want to have a dialogue and build nothing together among all Cubans. What they want to is win. They want to win the other side. And what we are trying to do is to bring some common sense and to understand, okay, this is good, this is bad, and we can, two different things can exist at the same time. Cuba can be good and bad at different stuff at the same time. So we're trying to fight that polarization and to fight that radicalization of the social media regarding Cuba. I can put the link here in the program below so that people can find us on YouTube. When you go to YouTube, you write Nuestra America and my name, maybe, and you will find the program. You can subscribe. We appreciate it. Thanks, Tracy.
Okay, well, I appreciate it very much, Harold, and thank you so much for coming to this first program that I'm doing. I apologize for the terrible internet connection that I have here in my home. I'm in Northeast Florida in a not super populated area, and I think that the internet connection, maybe this isn't the best place to do live streaming, but I'll work on that. And I'd like to ask viewers to help me come up with a title for my program. I'm thinking of calling it Commotion News or something like that, because news is always commotion. It's always chaotic, and we certainly have a lot of commotion going on in our country right now. But before we sign off, Harold, is there anything that you would like to add?
Yes, I would like to thank you. Tracy, you have been one of the most serious journalists regarding Cuba since I've joined the media and since I've joined the public sphere regarding Cuba. So thank you for your seriousness and your professionality on the work that you do. I know it's not the easy option. The easy option is to be radicalized. Thank you for your seriousness. Thank you for inviting me to the program. I'm very glad to meet all your friends here. So we have new people joining in now. I think Tracy is coming back now. Tracy? Tracy?
Yeah, thank you very much. My line crashed.
Okay.
This internet connection I have is just awful, so it just crashes all the time.
I'm glad to be back whenever you want me back.
I'd love to have you back sometime, and thank you for everything. I always enjoy talking to you, and I wish you the best here in the USA.
Thank you. Thanks for your audience. See you soon.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.